I want you to think about your parents for a second. Whatever their financial situation looked like when you were growing up, whether they were comfortable or stressed or somewhere in between, think about the mistakes they made with money. Maybe they carried credit card debt for years. Maybe they bought too much house. Maybe they never invested. Maybe they spent every raise the month they got it. Whatever it was, you probably noticed. You probably told yourself sometime in your teens or 20s that you'd do it differently, that your generation was smarter, that you had better tools, better information, better access to the financial system than they ever did. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're making the exact same mistake. You're just making it with a different name, a different app, and a different cultural wrapper around it. The core error is identical. It's been identical for every generation that has ever earned a paycheck in this country. Your grandparents made it. Your parents made it. You're making it right now. And if nothing changes, your kids will make it too. I know this because I made it. I made the version of it that's specific to my generation, the one that looks and feels completely unique to my era, but is, at its foundation, the same pattern that has kept Americans broke for 70 years. I didn't see it while I was doing it. Nobody does. That's the whole point. The mistake is invisible from inside the generation living through it. It only becomes obvious when you zoom out and look at the pattern across all of them simultaneously. That's what this video is going to do. We're going to walk through every generation, from the boomers to Gen Z, and I'm going to show you the exact same mistake wearing 4 different costumes. By the time we're done, you'll know which costume yours is wearing. You'll see it for the first time. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's get into it. The mistake, stripped down to its skeleton, is this. Every generation finds a way to consume the present at the expense of the future, and the mechanism they use to do it feels so normal within their cultural context that they don't recognize it as a mistake until decades later. The mechanism changes. The outcome doesn't. Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, each one found a culturally acceptable, socially reinforced, economically encouraged way to spend more than they kept. Each one believed their version was different. Each one arrived at the same destination. Let me show you how. The Boomers version. The generation born between 1946 and 1964 had something no generation before them had ever experienced: cheap, widely available consumer credit. Before the 1970s, borrowing money for anything other than a house or a car was unusual. Credit cards existed, but they were tools of convenience for the upper middle class, not everyday spending instruments. Then came deregulation, the expansion of Visa and MasterCard, and the normalization of revolving debt as a lifestyle tool. By the 1980s, credit cards weren't just normal, they were everywhere. Malls were built around them. Entire retail economies assumed you'd swipe now and figure it out later. Boomers were the first generation to treat debt as a standard feature of American life rather than a warning sign. They financed everything. Houses larger than they needed because real estate always goes up. Cars that matched their self-image because monthly payments made luxury accessible. Vacations on credit because they'd pay it off when the bonus hits. They did this because the economy told them it was smart. Interest rates were high, but incomes were rising. Housing values climbed steadily through the 80s and 90s. The stock market boomed. Pensions still existed for many workers. The future felt guaranteed. It wasn't. Nearly half of baby boomers are approaching or in retirement with little to no retirement savings. A 2023 report found that more than 40% of boomers nearing retirement had zero in their retirement accounts. The CFP Board's 2025 study found that less than 40% of Gen X adults who watched their boomer parents struggle said they were satisfied with their own retirement savings. Boomers' mistake wasn't greed. It wasn't stupidity. It was the deeply rational-sounding belief that rising incomes and rising assets would always outpace their borrowing. For some, it did. For the majority, it didn't even come close. The median net worth for Americans in their 70s, many of whom are boomers, is about $432,000, according to Empower data from January 2026. That includes home equity, which you can't spend on groceries without selling your house. The median retirement account balance for those aged 55 to 64 is around 185,000, according to the Survey of Consumer Finances. 29% of current retirees say they have no money saved for retirement at all, according to a 2026 Clever Real Estate survey. These are the boomers, the generation that had pensions, rising home values, a 30-year bull market, and cheaper college than anyone who came after them. The generation that still ended up, by the tens of millions, unable to afford their own old age. The mistake wore the costume of consumer credit. It looked like a mortgage on a 4-bedroom house when a 3-bedroom would have been fine. It looked like a leased Cadillac when a paid-off Buick was sitting in the driveway. It looked like "we'll figure it out" repeated so many times across so many decades that figuring it out eventually meant calling your kids and asking if you could move in. Gen X's version. Born between 1965 and 1980, Gen X watched their boomer parents spend freely and, in many cases, suffer the consequences. They entered adulthood during the recession of the early 1990s, saw the dot-com crash, and lived through 2008 as homeowners and parents. They should have been the generation that broke the pattern. They had front-row seats to what happens when you over-leverage. Instead, Gen X made the same mistake wearing a different costume. Their version was dual-income lifestyle inflation. Gen X was the first generation where 2-income households became the standard rather than the exception. When both partners worked, family income often jumped to $120,000, $150,000, $180,000 in metro areas. That felt like abundance. So they spent like it was. They bought houses that required both incomes to service the mortgage. They leased 2 cars instead of 1. They enrolled kids in private schools, club sports, travel teams, and tutoring programs that cost thousands per child per year. Their lifestyle was engineered to consume 2 full salaries, leaving almost no margin if one income disappeared. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, millions of Gen X families discovered that their dual-income lifestyle had 0 structural resilience. One layoff, one reduction in hours, one medical event, and the whole thing collapsed. A CFP board study found that 49% of Gen X adults are more financially anxious and less financially secure today because of financial regrets from their 20s and 30s. Their biggest regret? Not saving enough during their peak earning years. The most common advice Gen Xers give to younger generations, according to the same study, is to start saving for retirement now, even if it means small amounts. 59% of Gen X respondents said exactly that. They learned the lesson. They learned it 30 years too late. Gen X's median 401k balance at the end of 2025 was just $67,100, according to Fidelity. This is a generation with members in their late 50s and early 60s. $67,000 for a generation that, in many cases, earned 6-figure household incomes for decades. The money was there, the gap wasn't. Their dual incomes didn't build wealth. Their dual incomes funded a lifestyle that consumed everything and left the bucket empty. The costume was different. Instead of consumer credit, it was dual income entitlement. Instead of Cadillacs on credit, it was private school tuitions and granite countertops that made sense because both partners were working. The mistake underneath was identical. Spend the present. Ignore the future. Assume the income will always be there. The millennial version. Born between 1981 and 1996, millennials are the generation that was supposed to reject all of this. They graduated into the 2008 recession. They watched their parents lose homes. They read articles about the death of homeownership and the student loan crisis. They were the most educated generation in American history and simultaneously the most economically anxious. They knew the system was broken. They talked about it constantly. Then, they made the same mistake in the most millennial way possible: experiential spending. Millennials replaced their parents' materialism with a different kind of consumption. Instead of big houses and luxury cars, they spent on experiences: travel, dining, festivals, concerts, fitness classes, boutique coffee, curated subscriptions, wellness retreats. The mantra was experiences over things, And it sounded enlightened. It sounded like a rejection of boomer excess. It was actually the same mistake wearing yoga pants and holding an oat milk latte. The National Restaurant Association data shows that Americans spend roughly $3,900 a year on food away from home. For millennials, that number skews significantly higher because dining out isn't just eating, it's socializing, identity expression, and content creation. Millennials spend more on travel than any previous generation did at the same age, according to multiple industry surveys. They spend more on subscriptions, more on self-care, more on treating themselves as a coping mechanism for the financial stress they publicly acknowledge but privately fund. Here's the data that makes me genuinely sad. Millennials are now in their late 20s through early 40s. Many are in their peak earning years. Their median 401k balance is roughly $41,000, according to Fidelity. 49% of millennials don't have enough emergency savings to cover 3 months of expenses, according to a 2025 Bank of America Better Money Habits study. They carry more credit card debt per person than boomers did at the same age. Total credit card debt across the country hit $1.28 trillion at the end of 2025. Millennials are a significant contributor to that number. The experiences were real. The memories are real. The Instagram posts are real. The money is gone. The retirement accounts are thin. The emergency funds are insufficient. The gap between income and spending was consumed by avocado toast jokes that everyone laughed at while nobody did the math on what $300 weekly of living my best life actually costs over 15 years. $300 a week invested instead of spent at 8% over 15 years is roughly $441,000. That's a retirement foundation. That's financial freedom in your 50s. Instead, it's 1,700 Saturday brunches and a vague sense that the future will work itself out somehow. This is not financial advice, but I want you to see the pattern. Boomers consume the future through credit. Gen X consumed it through dual income lifestyle inflation. Millennials consumed it through experiential spending, reframed as self-care and personal growth. The costume changed. The outcome is converging toward the same destination. And then there's Gen Z. Born between 1997 and 2012, Gen Z is the most financially aware young generation in American history by almost every measure. They save at 3 times the rate young people did in the 1990s. The number of young adults with retirement accounts has increased by 36% over the past decade. 40% of people in their early 20s have invested money outside of a 401k, compared to just 8% 10 years ago, according to the J.P. Morgan Chase Institute. Gen Z talks about money openly. They watch financial content. They understand the vocabulary of investing in ways that would have been unimaginable for a 22-year-old in 1995. And they are already making the mistake. Their costume is the most sophisticated one yet. Gen Z's version is frictionless micro-consumption. Buy now, pay later services. Tap to pay everywhere. Subscription stacking. Microtransactions inside apps and games. Gamified investing platforms that feel more like slot machines than brokerage accounts. Cryptocurrency treated as a lottery ticket. Online gambling packaged as prediction markets. 57% of Gen Z BNPL users had missed a payment as of early 2026, according to LendingTree. Gen Zers average $94,101 in personal debt, which is the highest of any generation and significantly more than millennials at $59,000 or Gen X at $53,000, according to Fortune's analysis of recent data. 69% of people aged 18 to 26 have participated in some form of gambling, per a NerdWallet survey. A quarter of Gen Z and millennials consider online gambling an investment, 25%. They think betting is investing. Gen Z's financial literacy scores are lower than every other generation. Only 31% of Gen Zers could answer at least half the questions on the TIAA Institute's Personal Finance Index, compared to 52% of Gen X. They're the most financially aware generation in terms of talking about money and consuming financial content. They are simultaneously the least financially literate generation in terms of actually understanding how money works. The awareness is performative. The understanding is shallow. They know the words compound interest. Many of them cannot explain what it means in concrete terms. The frictionless economy is designed to exploit this gap. When you tap your phone against a terminal, your brain doesn't register the payment the way it would if you counted out $42 in cash. When you split a $200 purchase into 4 installments of $50, your brain underweights the total commitment. When a trading app sends you a push notification that a stock is trending, it triggers the same dopamine response as a social media like. The entire financial infrastructure surrounding Gen Z is built to reduce friction between the desire to spend and the act of spending. Friction is what gives your brain time to evaluate a purchase. Remove the friction, and the purchase happens before the evaluation does. Gen Z isn't spending on McMansions or Cadillacs or 3-week European vacations. They're spending $42 on DoorDash 4 times a week. They're paying $7 here, $12 there, $9.99 for this subscription, $14.99 for that one. Each transaction is tiny. The aggregate is devastating. A 2026 study found that 74% of Americans underestimate their subscription spending by more than $100 a month. Among younger consumers, that gap is even wider because they have more subscriptions, more BNPL installment plans, and more microtransactions running simultaneously. The costume is digital, frictionless, and nearly invisible. The mistake underneath is the same one boomers made with their first Sears credit card in 1978. Consume the present, defer the cost, assume tomorrow will sort itself out. Let me zoom out now, because when you lay these 4 generations side by side, the pattern isn't just visible, it's screaming. Boomers made the mistake through consumer credit. They consumed the future by borrowing against it. Gen X made it through lifestyle inflation. They consume the future by spending dual incomes as fast as they earn them. Millennials made it through experiential spending. They consume the future by reframing consumption as personal growth. Gen Z is making it through frictionless micro-consumption. They're consuming the future $42 at a time through apps that make spending feel like breathing. 4 generations, 4 mechanisms, 1 mistake. Spend more than you keep. Consume the present at the expense of the future. Arrive at the same destination wondering what happened. The reason this keeps happening isn't generational weakness, it's structural. The American consumer economy generates over $28 trillion in GDP. Roughly 70% of that GDP comes from consumer spending. The entire economic machine is designed, incentivized, and engineered to ensure that every dollar you earn is spent as quickly and as frictionlessly as possible. Advertising, credit products, payment technologies, social media that equates spending with identity. The economy doesn't want you to save. Saving is the opposite of what the machine needs. The machine needs you to consume. Every generation gets a new, more efficient, more psychologically sophisticated version of the consumption engine, and every generation falls for it because the engine is always better than the last version. In the 1980s, the engine was a credit card mailed to your house with a pre-approved limit. In the 2000s, it was a mortgage broker telling you that you qualified for $350,000 when you should have bought at $200,000. In the 2010s, it was Seamless and ClassPass and Treat Yourself trending on Twitter. In the 2020s, it's Klarna splitting your Target cart into 4 payments and a push notification from Robinhood telling you Dogecoin is up 14%. Each version is more seamless, more invisible, more embedded in your daily routine. Each version makes the previous generation's consumption tool look primitive, and each version produces the same result: a population that earns more than enough and keeps almost none of it. The U.S. personal savings rate sits at about 4% as of early 2026, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. 4 cents out of every after-tax dollar. The American median household income is over $80,000, among the highest in the world. Yet 58% of workers say their retirement savings are behind where they should be, according to Bankrate. 24% have zero emergency savings. The median net worth for Americans in their 50s is $180,227, according to Empower. For a generation that's been working for 30 years, that means the typical person kept less than 10% of their lifetime earnings. This isn't a generational problem. It's a human problem being exploited by an economic system that gets more sophisticated at extraction with every passing decade. Boomers weren't stupid. Gen X wasn't careless. Millennials weren't irresponsible. Gen Z isn't doomed. Each generation is simply navigating a consumption machine that is better designed than the one before it, without the one tool that makes navigation possible. That tool is the understanding of how money actually works over time. It's the understanding that every dollar has two lives: the life it lives when you spend it, which ends immediately, and the life it lives when you invest it, which compounds for decades. It's the understanding that $500 a month at 8% over 30 years becomes roughly $745,000. That the $42 DoorDash order you didn't think about costs you roughly $412 over 20 years in lost compounding. That a 3% 401k contribution rate and a 15% contribution rate over the same career produce outcomes separated by nearly $1 million. Every generation lacks this understanding in roughly equal proportions. Financial literacy has never been systematically taught in American schools. It's not required for graduation in most states. It's not part of most college curricula. It's not embedded in workplace onboarding. The most important set of skills a person can have for navigating adult life, understanding compound interest, APRs, tax-advantaged accounts, the real cost of debt, the mathematics of time, is left entirely to chance. Some people learn it from parents who had it. Most don't. The TIAA Institute data is brutal. Only 31% of Gen Z can answer basic financial literacy questions correctly. Among Gen X, it's 52%, which is the highest of any generation and still means nearly half of them can't demonstrate basic financial competency. These aren't obscure questions about derivatives or tax law. They're questions about how interest works, how inflation erodes purchasing power, what diversification means, the fundamentals, the basics, the rules of the game everyone is already playing. When you don't understand the rules, you can't see the mistake. That's why every generation makes it. The boomers didn't see the credit trap because nobody taught them what 18% APR actually costs over 20 years. Gen X didn't see the lifestyle inflation trap because nobody showed them the math of what happens when you spend 2 salaries instead of 1 and invest 0. Millennials didn't see the experiential spending trap because nobody translated living my best life into the opportunity cost of 15 years of uninvested discretionary spending. Gen Z doesn't see the frictionless consumption trap because nobody has explained that the absence of financial friction is not a feature. It's a weapon aimed directly at their future selves. But here's what gives me hope. Each generation is also slightly better positioned to break the cycle than the one before it. Gen Z is saving at 3 times the rate of young people in the 1990s. 40% of young adults are investing outside of retirement accounts. The financial conversation has moved from taboo to mainstream. People talk about money now. They share their debt payoff journeys publicly. They post their net worth milestones. The shame is lifting. The information is more accessible than it's ever been. What's still missing is the bridge between information and understanding. Watching a TikTok about compound interest is not the same as understanding compound interest. Hearing the phrase, "pay yourself first," is not the same as setting up an automatic transfer the day after payday. Knowing that a Roth IRA exists is not the same as opening one, funding it, and selecting an index fund. Information creates awareness. Understanding creates behavior. The gap between those two things is where every generation's version of the mistake lives. I want to tell you about 2 people in my life who represent the 2 sides of this perfectly. My Aunt Lorraine is a boomer. She worked as a secretary for a school district for 31 years. She never earned more than $48,000. She drove used cars, cooked most of her meals at home, and contributed to her 403(b) every single paycheck starting at 27. She didn't follow the stock market. She didn't have a financial advisor. She just understood, at a fundamental level, that money saved today is money that works for you tomorrow. She retired 3 years ago with $680,000 in her retirement accounts and a paid-off house. She's comfortable. She sleeps 8 hours a night. She told me once that the secret was boring consistency for a really long time. My cousin Miles is a millennial. He makes $104,000 a year as a product manager at a tech company. He travels internationally twice a year. He eats out 5 nights a week. He uses BNPL for clothing purchases. He subscribes to 11 streaming services, 2 meal kit deliveries, a gym he visits twice a month, and a meditation app he opened last in February. He's 37. His 401k balance is $23,000 because he contributes 3%, the default rate his employer set when he was hired 6 years ago, and he's never changed it. He has $9,000 in credit card debt at 22% APR. Miles earns more than double what Lorraine ever made. Miles will retire with a fraction of what Lorraine accumulated. The same mistake, a different generation, a different costume. The outcome heading toward the same place it always goes. The thing that separated Lorraine from Miles isn't discipline. Lorraine doesn't have superhuman willpower. She eats cookies. She watches her shows. She buys herself flowers on Fridays. The thing that separated them is that Lorraine understood, from a relatively young age, how money moves through a life over decades. She understood that the gap between income and spending is the entire game. She understood that time amplifies whatever you do with your money, for better or worse. She understood that the consumption machine is always going to ask for more, and the only defense is a system that moves money toward your future before the present gets a chance to claim it. That understanding has a name. It's the same name I keep coming back to in every video I make because it's the single variable that most consistently predicts financial outcomes across all demographics, all income levels, and all generations. Financial literacy. It's the thing Lorraine had and Miles doesn't. It's the thing 31% of Gen Z demonstrates and 48% of Gen X still lacks. It's the thing that breaks the cycle, that makes the mistake visible before it happens, that transforms every spending decision from unconscious to intentional. Without financial literacy, each generation is doomed to discover its own version of the mistake the hard way. With it, the pattern breaks. The costume becomes transparent. You see the mechanism for what it is, whether it's a credit card, a lifestyle, a brunch habit, or a BNPL installment plan, and you make a different choice. Not because you're morally superior, because you can see the math. The mistake is the same every time. Consume the present at the expense of the future. The mechanism changes every 20 years. The solution has never changed. Understand how money works. Build the gap, protect the gap. Let time do the rest. Your generation's version of the mistake is already running. It started the first time you swipe without thinking, financed without calculating, or subscribed without auditing. You didn't notice because nobody notices from inside the generation. The mistake is always invisible when you're wearing it. But now you've seen the pattern. 4 generations, 4 costumes, 1 mistake. The question is whether you'll be the person in your generation who sees through the costume in time. Because at every age, there's a specific version of this trap waiting for you. A specific mechanism calibrated to your decade of life, your income level, your social pressures, and your cultural moment. The trap at 25 is different from the trap at 35, which is different from the trap at 45 and 55. Each one feels completely unique while you're living through it. Each one produces the same outcome if you don't see it coming. The people who build wealth aren't the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who recognize the trap at their specific age before it closed. They're the ones who knew what was coming around the corner because they studied the map before they walked through the territory. Your generation's mistake doesn't have to be your mistake, but the window to step around it doesn't stay open forever. It narrows with every year that passes, every dollar that compounds for someone else instead of you, every decade that moves the curve further out of reach. The pattern is real. The math is real. The next trap, the one with your name on it, the one built specifically for the decade of life you're living right now, is real too. The only question is whether you'll see it before it sees you.